Good afternoon, my friends. This is Paul, and today I'll be reviewing for you
Donkey Kong Country Returns HD for the Nintendo Switch.
This is a definitive edition of sorts of both previous versions of Donkey Kong Country Returns. The original came out on the Wii in 2010, and then a 3DS remake came out in 2013. Unfortunately, both versions had pros and cons that made it somewhat hard to choose between the two. The Wii version ran at 60 frames per second and was on a home console, so of course it was wider screen and had slightly better graphics, but the downside was that it forced you to use motion controls. It had very few accessibility options, so that certain stages you were forced to let the game play itself for you with the Super Guide, which was not a very popular thing at the time that it came out. But then the 3DS version only ran at 30 frames per second, had the graphics downgraded, but to make up for it, it allowed you to play with traditional button controls, and it had an easy mode, which gave a couple of additional helper items in Cranky Kong's shop, had you start out with a couple of additional hearts, and had a few extra post-game levels, and made it easier to unlock them by allowing you to buy the orbs needed to access the post-game world, instead of requiring you to find all of the Kong levels in all the levels and then beat all the temples, which was a very grueling and tedious process. So now this version keeps the 60 frames per second and slightly upgrades the resolution so that it looks better. I've heard some people say it's just up-resing the 3DS version, but I could be wrong. And it also gives you the option of using motion controls if you want the Wii experience while keeping in the traditional button controls from the 3DS version and from Tropical Freeze. It also preserves the easy mode, now calling it modern mode, presumably to avoid offending anyone who thinks that, oh, Nintendo's easy mode games are for babies. This game is not for babies. It can be quite hard. And it also preserves all of the post-game levels. Now you might be wondering, is there anything new about this re-release? Not really. Really, the only things that I noticed were, since it's in HD, the bananas and the banana coins are slightly shinier than they used to be, but honestly, the graphical difference is pretty negligible. You could probably do a side-by-side comparison and point out a few things here and there, but it doesn't look that much different to the average onlooker. It actually is kind of disappointing because Tropical Freeze looks so much better, and that came out on inferior hardware. And yet the Wii U version looks better than this Switch version that's in itself a remake of a 2010 game. There's a new death animation when Donkey Kong falls off the level in a bonus stage. That seems kind of random. Either that or I just never noticed on the Wii. And for some reason, they did some terrible audio mixing during the loading screens where the music suddenly gets louder when the game is loading. I'm probably the only person on the internet that's going to complain about that, but seeing as I constantly get complaints on my own videos for sound mixing, and I'm just an amateur YouTuber, it baffles me that a multi-million-dollar company can't get that fixed when they have so many more people working on a game than just an amateur YouTuber. Now, since I already reviewed the Wii version, this is going to be more of a re-review of the 3DS version, since that game I never had footage for, as well as talking about if I think that this port is worth it. Now, as far as the 3DS version goes, I really appreciated the addition of the easy mode. I liked how it gave you a couple more hearts, but it didn't force you to use any other quality of life improvements unless you wanted to. You could buy extra items from Cranky Kong's shop, but honestly, I didn't use any of them. The only items I used from Cranky's shop were the banana potions, and I only used them for one level. Now, it could just be that I've played the Wii version so much that I didn't need the extra help, but I'm grateful that those items existed. I do think it's a bit unfortunate that there is an item called the Crash Guard, which allows you to take a couple more hits in the Rocket Barrel and Minecart levels, which previously would defeat you in one hit if you made a mistake, but you have to equip those items before you go into the level. And so that means that you have to reset the level if you're having too much trouble just to put on the Crash Guard. Whereas in Tropical Freeze, which only came out a year later, mind you, had a crash guard by default, and then you could buy another one in the shop if that was still too hard for you. So some of the best lessons from that game didn't make it into this one, but we'll get to that in due time. Now there are new levels in the 3DS version, and I'm really glad that we can finally play them in widescreen and in HD here. And if you hadn't told me that these were made by a different studio than Retro, because Monster Games developed the 3DS version, I probably would have said, whoa, they fit in perfectly well with the rest of the levels. They start out pretty easy, but then they quickly ramp up in difficulty and are clearly designed with the intent of these are for people who have mastered the original game and want to see if their skills still hold up. And honestly, I really like these levels. Sure, they reuse all the music from the base game, but I particularly don't care when the levels are this good. And then the Golden Temple is absolutely wonderful. Yes, the Golden Temple was already in the original version, and I don't feel like the additions here in easy mode make it more manageable, because I beat it on both the original and the 3DS versions, but it was still so much fun to have the epic callback to Donkey Kong Jr., and just the whole thing was a treat from start to finish. And I really hope to capture some footage of me beating it, because I just put my camera to my 3DS and did it in an old video, but the times have definitely changed in my channel's favor. Now, Donkey Kong Country Returns, let me make this very clear, is a masterpiece, no matter what system you play it on. It was amazing in 2010, even if it was brutally difficult, and would sometimes make fun of you if you had too much trouble with it by having the pig at each checkpoint wave a white flag and say, hey, would you like me to beat it for you? And unfortunately, they did not fix that in this remake. But this port feels like it was the lowest amount of effort possible, presumably because they thought, well, hey, all we can do is combine the two versions. It's a pretty much perfect game by itself, so why do we even need to fix anything? The problem is that they probably could have taken a few lessons from Tropical Freeze, which, again, let me repeat, only came out a year after the 3DS remake and only 4 years after the Wii original. They don't have Dixie Kong or Cranky Kong as partners. Now, you could argue, well, Cranky Kong runs the shop, so how could you get past that? You could have easily had Funky Kong take over the shop. I mean, in the Tropical Freeze remake on the Switch, they added Funky Kong as a playable character and had his parrot take over the shop. So you could have been creative, you just chose not to. You don't have the Kong Pow moves. Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong's fur is considerably more flat, whereas it was nice and furry in the Wii U version. No alternate camera angles. The music wasn't remixed at all. It's still the exact same soundtrack. Very good soundtrack, mind you, but still not quite to the level of Tropical Freeze's big band jazzy style. There's no new levels, no new items, and you could argue, well, the 3DS levels are there, but they still could have included more to make it seem more definitive, especially considering the price point. This goes for $60 when you can get both versions of the original game for less than that. At least I think you can. The secondhand market might have a few extra things to say about that, but I remember on the Wii U Virtual Console, Donkey Kong Country Returns was $20, and I think you could also get it for either $30 or $20 on Nintendo Select, and the 3DS version was, I think, $30. So combine that together, less than what you would pay for this definitive edition. Now, I do believe that this is the best way to play Donkey Kong Country Returns, as being able to play it both on the TV and in handheld really makes it easier to take the experience wherever you want. It looks and runs much better than the 3DS version. I'm not a frame rate stickler, but I'm pretty sure it was much more responsive than the 3DS version. And the controls are still really great. A couple of times at the early portions of the game, it did misread a couple of my inputs, but that could have just been a skill issue. I do think for the most part, the controls are still really tight. The level design is spectacular. I just wish more had been done to make it justify the price, so that you didn't pay $60 for something that's essentially an old game just repurposed. I do think you should pick this up, but only as either a rental or when it goes on a deep sale, maybe to like $30 or $40, I think would be reasonable. But if you have no other way of playing Donkey Kong Country Returns, I think this is a perfectly amazing way to do it, especially with the extra levels from the 3DS version, not being forced to use button controls, and being able to take it wherever you want. Now, do I think it's better than Tropical Freeze? No, but without this game, Tropical Freeze wouldn't exist. And in addition to that, they both just have their own set of unique levels and unique concepts. And a lot of these levels are wonder effects in and of themselves if you're going to compare them to Super Mario Bros. Wonder, because there's often a lot of really cool stuff going on. So you'll get a lot of spectacle, a lot of cool stuff happening in the background. Not as much as Tropical Freeze, but still way more than you'd usually get in a Mario level. It is a very hard game, and easy mode does make it easier, but it can still be quite challenging. So casual gamers might want to use a bit of caution, but if you're a seasoned platformer that's looking for something that's considerably harder than something like Super Mario Bros. Wonder, then you're going to have a blast. So with that, that concludes my thoughts, but before we end the video, I thought it would be cool if you guys heard my editor Esabelle's thoughts, since she doesn't play games as much as me except for a few VR experiences. So I hope you'll enjoy her thoughts from the perspective of someone who has not played the game. And until the next time, remember to keep the faith, stay epic, and God bless. Over to you, Esabelle.
Hey Paul's audience, it's Esabelle, and Paul asked me to share a non-gamer's perspective on this game. Since I haven't actually played this game, Paul sent me some reviews so that I could get an idea of what it looked like and what it felt like, and how it might play. I do play a little bit of VR, but that doesn't really count towards classic gaming, and I do not think that I play it enough to be considered a gamer. Anyone who knows me even halfway well knows that I'm not a gamer. I've seen Markiplier play, but mainly Five Nights at Freddy's. But I will do my best to share my opinion of what it looks like and how it might handle a little bit of the features that I would love to see in a game if I were playing, and things like that. Let's go ahead and start, therefore, off on the smallest category that I could give, which is actual gameplay function. I've never played it. I can only guess based upon what I'm seeing in other videos that Paul has sent. It looks like it is one of those games that would have good replayability. If you finished it, it's still going to be a little bit of a challenge to do it again. Once you've caught on and you've mastered the challenge, that's whenever it starts to get therapeutic. This looks like the type of game that might have multiple ways of completing the different levels, and therefore you could play it and try to up your efficiency and up your skill. From what I can see from these videos, it doesn't look like a whole bunch of puzzles, because puzzles are very hard for replayability on a game, in the sense that once you figure them out, there is no challenge left for you. But whenever it comes to execution on a game, that's where you can see this leveling up. Even if you know how, you still have to get that muscle memory. You have to get that agility. So it looks like the type of game that you could replay over and over again. On to something that I have a little bit more to say on, the animation and the visuals. I am a very visual person, as is obvious by the fact that I am into editing. This game looks pretty darn good to me. I enjoy the colors, I enjoy how alive it feels, it's not really drab and dreary. From what I know of the characters, the designs have not been altered in a way that disparages the original design. They look very accurate to the characters that most people know. The worlds look very unique. The only critiques that I do have is the textures look a little bit off. It looks like it could be just slightly sharper. Not a lot. I think ray tracing is mainly useful whenever it comes to more realistic types of game, more than less realistic animated looking ones. However, I feel like I could use just a hair of ray tracing. But I would say that it does not need that, because I also know that ray tracing can interfere with game functioning.
Ray tracing? Really? Maybe that ray tracing was a little too much. Help me, I'm trapped in the 2 frame per second universe. Ray tracing, please.
I do not wish that upon anybody. So I think the visuals can take a hit if it means a smoother running game. I do appreciate the fact that you get more lives whenever you have Diddy Kong along for the ride. What I would like to know about the gameplay is whether or not it has autosave and how often you are able to save. Because even without much gaming experience, I can already tell just from watching other people play, I would be ready to punch a wall if I worked through a huge, expansive level only to die and realize that I have to go way back to the beginning. Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach, I am looking at you because I know that once you hit a certain point, you have to go on without saving.
Learn what? Oh, I can't save now. That's what it was.
I cannot have that much comment upon how this game fits into the other games in the Mario Donkey Kong sphere because I'm not really familiar with those. The only thing that I can comment on is this as a standalone game, and from what I'm seeing, it does look like a delightful game to play.